Now, it feels like every year there's some sort of controversy to come as a result of the Queen's, or used to be Queen's, now the King's birthday honours. It's par for the course, basically. But there was a large cohort of Australians today, particularly Victorians, I think, left aghast to learn that the former Premier Daniel Andrews received a Companion of the Order of Australia for, as I said earlier, among other things, his health policies. I mean, seriously, this is the Premier who presided over the diabolical hotel quarantine system that the Coat Review linked directly to the 768 deaths, and a lockdown that lasted 111 days amongst all the other days that he had lockdown, 262 in total. Then there was the litany of other lockdowns that I just talked about. You know, they were more draconian than the next. And I remember living through that last one there in Victoria. It was horrific. You couldn't even go outside and have an alcoholic beverage on your walk because apparently that was a danger to the community. Joining me now for his take on Andrews' honour, one of the few MPs during the COVID period with the guts to actually call out Andrews, Libertarian MP David Limbrick. David, I can imagine what your reaction was this morning, much the same as mine, I'm assuming.
Well, yes, Caleb, but it struck me, though, that, you know, anyone can give out awards. So I thought I'd give out my own award with the wooden spoon here.
Brilliant.
Like, aside from all the other things that you mentioned, Caleb, you know, we had the situation in the last term of Parliament where schools were shut down, not to save children, but to save everyone else, causing all sorts of developmental problems that we're just starting to understand. We had medicines forced upon the population. If you didn't take it, you were going to lose your job and become ostracised. All of these, and if you spoke up about it and wanted to protest in the streets, then the police had opened fire on you in the streets. It was absolutely outrageous, the human rights abuses. But aside from that, we had a situation where before the election, there was a promise of the Commonwealth Games. Then after the election, of course, whoops, it's too expensive now, and we're going to. Oh, and by the way, it cost $580 million. It just got wasted. We've been left with a police force that's been demoralised and finding it hard to recruit. We've got a health system in disarray with ramping all the time. Again, finding it hard to recruit. We've got debt up to the eyeballs, and we've got to pay all this back. I mean, you know, if that deserves an award, I don't know what sort of award it should be.
Well, I mean, you've got Andrew Giles and Daniel Andrews, of course, share a name in part, and it kind of makes sense when you look at the record of those two. And I just cannot get over how crazy they must be over at the Council for the Order of Australia. I mean, they get nominations, I'm sure, out the wazoo from people saying this person deserves an IM and that person deserves an AC and that person deserves an AO. And it's not uncommon, as I said earlier in the show, for former premiers to be given these titles, but you would have thought they'd look at it and go, okay, they both left last year, they both left with a fair bit of hatred towards them, the body is barely cold, why would we give them an AC now? You know, 5 years down the line is perhaps a different discussion. Why give it to them now?
There's been no reckoning. Like, I mean, all of these decisions that were made during the pandemic, there's been no analysis of whether they were good decisions or not. People are just assuming that. I mean, all the time people were comparing, I was comparing to other places in the world. The ones that spring to mind is Sweden and Japan, who did things very differently from us. And by just about every metric, they did better than us. So it's hard to say, were all these draconian measures that we went through in Victoria actually worth it? I'd say absolutely not. But there hasn't been any sort of reckoning. Where's the Royal Commission that's looking into this? Where's the analysis? And like, if there were mistakes made, like, how are we going to make sure that we don't make them again? I'm terrified that if, the next disease comes along, they'll just do the same thing again because, Dan did a great job and he got an award for it. So it must be the right thing to do, right?
Well, and that's the most galling thing about all of this, is you look at the US, where last week, of course, Anthony Fauci, the former chief medical advisor to the US president, actually had to get up in front of a congressional hearing and talk about the decisions he made and why he made them, where we found out that most of them were made on the basis of no thought or evidence whatsoever. I mean, he said we had 1.5 metres social distancing. Over there they had 6 foot, but he literally said that it just sort of appeared. It wasn't on the basis of any evidence. So that's obviously what happened here as well. We haven't had the Royal Commission we were promised. We had some limp-wristed thing where premiers aren't even compelled to go and talk to it. If you were Daniel Andrews, Mark McGowan or anyone else who was in power at the time, you know, you're laughing all to the way to the bank, how good I get my AC on the other side. But all the people who had to suffer through it had to wake up this morning and suffer a little bit more to see that old mate who dudded them for years has been rewarded and never investigated.
Yeah, I mean, there was never any sort of accountability for this. Like you say, there was never we haven't had a Royal Commission into it. I'm hoping that we'll have one, you know, sooner or later into what happened. But I mean, with other things as well, like the Commonwealth Games inquiry, you know, Dan just thought, well, I don't want to appear before that. Must have decided that it wasn't worth his time to come and explain those decisions. You know, I suppose it's only $600 million wasted. You know, who cares, right? Like that's the sort of attitude that we get here. And I don't think it's good enough.
No, I think good enough is not good enough, is putting it pretty mildly. If I remember correctly, Paul Keating once refused such an honour because he said, well, it's been given to me simply for doing my job. And I yearn for leaders of his kind, at least back in those days. And you have to wonder why anyone would want to accept an Order of Australia if it puts you in the club with people like Mark McGowan and Daniel Andrews. Thank you so much for your time, David Limbrick.